Hello and welcome to Telling Your Asset Management Story. Jim Stevens began his career as a mechanical engineer and spent years working in manufacturing before transitioning into higher education facilities leadership. Today, he's focused on connecting systems and people, ensuring that the data organizations collected actually support better decision making. In this episode, we'll talk about workforce challenges, integrating CMMS and financial systems, and how automation and emerging technologies can help organizations get more value from their asset data.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us today on Telling Your Asset Management Story. Really looking forward to hearing your story, learning more about Georgia Tech and how those two things have come together to find you where you are today.
No, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So, Jim, we always start our podcast by getting folks to tell their story. I'm always fascinated the journeys, the many different journeys and unique journeys that everybody takes to get where they are in the facility and asset management world. So, why don't you let our audience know how you ended up at Georgia Tech?
Well, sure. So I always wanted to be an engineer. So I did. I went to Georgia Tech as an undergrad, mechanical engineer. Uh, then I worked my way through industry, probably the first half of my career. I started as a plant engineer. I worked through being a plant manager. Did that for a number of years, and then those are long-hour jobs a lot of times. And I switched into higher ed probably 16 years ago. Served at Florida State University, ran their maintenance groups and engineering utilities. And then about 3.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to come here to Georgia Tech, uh, really primarily with the goal of bringing our utility infrastructure and some of our building infrastructure up to date. And since then, I'm on my third job now. I'm currently the vice president of infrastructure and sustainability, and it's been a really exciting time to come back to my kind of my home turf.
It's interesting. We were both at the Higher Education Facilities Forum earlier this week, and probably 3 or 4 people that I talked to did go back to work in facilities at their alma mater. Was that always part of the plan, Jim, or was that just sort of serendipity that you ended up back there?
I think it was serendipity that I ended up back here. That was, in fact, this is probably not the best joke, but I had a lot of my friends that I knew up here, and they said, "Well, why did it take you so long to come back?" I said, "Well, I didn't like it that much the first time." But yeah, it was a very hard place to go through and get the degree, but it was probably the most valuable thing I ever did. And then when I had the opportunity to come back, all jokes aside, I did see it as an opportunity for me to give back to an institution that set me on a career path that's allowed my entire career not to really have to worry about finding a job.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, it is. It's really neat how so many folks have kind of had that same idea and find that same mission in going back to the school where they were taught. So that's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about, Georgia Tech, your campus, your portfolio, just the facilities, the size, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so this campus, it's about 450 acres. We're now, at least as of the last few months, we're the largest school in the state of Georgia now. We have well over 50,000 students. We have a mix of the biggest and brightest and most modern buildings down to some of the oldest and worst. So it's a blend of old tech and new tech, great condition and needs a little work condition. And the campus has been a leader in sustainability for a long time. So we have probably the only living building in the southeast, the Candida building. It generates double the amount of energy it consumes with a set of solar cells.
Yeah, I had a chance to see a presentation on it at a conference. I think it was earlier this year. It's a pretty spectacular building.
It is, and it's connected to our Eco Commons, which was the university really building an urban park that is an active part of our stormwater management system. And so it's kind of an area where you don't really maintain turf. You've got natural native vegetation that serves the purpose of filtering A lot of people don't know the city of Atlanta has a mixed sewer system, so everything stormwater goes right into the regular sewer. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is minimize the amount of stormwater that we put into the system.
And I guess being kind of right downtown, what are some of the unique challenges just with that? Right. Well, before we get into the asset management challenges, but just being right downtown, how do you manage that given that it's, I mean, Atlanta's such a busy metropolitan area?
Yeah, well, an interesting part. So, lately, all of our new projects are just getting taller. We'll be wrapping up this year an 18-story tower for our industrial engineering and our College of Business. And those present new challenges to a maintenance group that's largely not familiar with maintaining high-rise buildings. Uh, and so that's going to be long-term challenge because the property in the Georgia Tech neighborhood is all extremely expensive. So as the institute grows, we're going to have to build up to be able to justify the cost of land. And then on the campus core, it's finding technicians that can deal well with the current technology, but also have enough understanding of the old technology.
Right. Interesting. And I mean, yeah, we've kind of morphed into the asset management challenges and things like that. So obviously, you mentioned having some brand new buildings, state of the art, some old, finding people. What would you say again relative to the asset management and aspects of the campus? What are the three biggest challenges that you're facing at Georgia Tech right now?
So my answers on that may be a little different than the rest of the world, but I see and I know workforce availability is a problem for everyone, but I see that as an asset management problem. It's well, essentially, if we're going to maintain these assets and care about them and track them and do all the things we need to do, we've got to have a trained workforce that is able to do that. And so, for example, if you know where everything's at, but you don't have the tools to maintain, that's a real problem. So I also see that the complexity of new buildings and the control systems that are put in are a little too much, I think, for a lot of the new technicians. And I go back to if you look at things maybe 10, 15 years ago where you were still on a lot of the 485 networks for your field devices. When everything went to internet or Ethernet, really, uh, you lost a lot of technicians that knew how to do that work. And so what ends up happening, there's a million different reasons for why your technicians are going to say they don't know how to service the equipment the same way. And so it makes for a little more complex contracting, and it also makes for a situation where uh, you're in this continual training mode.
Hmm.
Uh, but going back to item number one, you still don't have a real good ease of getting people into the trades.
Right.
Um, the third one is cost management. If you don't manage your assets, you can't track the cost. And so if you can't track the cost, you don't know where your spend is, and you can't tailor your organization to a point where it can manage those expenses in an appropriate manner. And I would say in higher ed, there's varying levels within varying institutions for how they track cost. Um, but coming from manufacturing, we had to know our cost because our cost rolled into our standard cost models, and that's what determined whether or not your plant made money or not. And so that same type of thing I see um, really going to be a bigger thing in higher ed because as budgets get pinched, you have to know where to cut, and you can't know where to cut if you don't know your cost.
Right. How are you and your team trying to overcome that on campus?
Well, so our first step is we have a your computerized maintenance management system, but it has never really been fully set up with the assets in it. There are pieces and parts. Our first part is we're going to link the financial fields in our financial system with the same fields that we have in our CMMS. Then we're going to rebuild the asset register and make sure that everything that we want to track cost on has is set up in that system. And at that point, then we can track cost. And so, what's typical in higher ed is you're going to have a financial system that's largely organized for the larger numbers, and they may not be able to break it up into smaller GL accounts for your unit. So they're counting on the fact that your units are going to have to be able to subdivide those larger buckets into the smaller buckets. And so that is one thing that's a little different between manufacturing and higher ed. In manufacturing, you would already have gone and divided up. In higher ed, it's typically on the units back to come up with those types of things, and so that's what we're working on.
Excellent. And I guess with across all the different departments and the units, there's got to be a lot of coordination and standardization so that that data is aligned.
Yeah, if you're not standardized, you're in real problems, and even if it's critical in asset management, but it's even more critical if you look at how data is being used today. And so a lot of what we're looking at is your modern facilities group in a large institute is going to have multiple enterprise software systems, and we're looking at how all those data fields should match up. And because if we can't get them to match up, we can't combine various data sets together to draw different analysis on. So.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other individuals that I interviewed was just talking about building names. Just you have 5 different systems and the building names themselves, which is, I mean, look, everything in asset management when you're talking about facilities, starts at the building and then kind of rolls down. And when you don't have those data points lined up, or when a name changes, it only gets changed in one system and not the other 4 and other things like that. You're almost defeated before you even start the battle, right? In those cases.
Well, that's exactly it. And see, on space, for example, we have standardized on that to a set of tables. And so as we take our other enterprise systems, we're importing the tables and only have one system of record for space. And that's where we're heading for each enterprise system. We determine what is it the record of, and then it will dominate the pushing of that type of information to the other systems. So
that's great. Have you come across, because I mean, again, it's more of a thing of the past, Jim, but have you come across any closed systems that aren't willing to share, like across any of the enterprise systems that you have, or are all your systems open and easy to share?
That's a really interesting question. That's actually one of the things that we faced, recently. So you have some systems that aren't, really good at sharing. They still depending on someone to log in and go and gather information out. But that's where robotic process automation comes in. So robotic process automation allows us to build a bot that goes and logs into the other system, extracts and transfers information into the other system. And so that's a part of our analytics team right now, as we have several RPA bots running. And I would say that's probably a little bit unique for a facilities type organization. But one of the bots we built, we have the City of Atlanta water system, still doesn't have really the data connects we have. And our bot actually goes, pulls the bill out, collects the information, transcribes it into our database. And so that we now have eliminated just tons of hours of work for doing that.
Wow. So, I mean, you're right. I haven't heard of a lot of organizations that have that type of a team. Is that something that you brought to Georgia Tech, or is that something that was there before? And if you were there in its inception, how did that come about? Because I think that's a really kind of interesting idea.
So, and it's also a very bizarre story, actually. So when I first came to Atlanta, my title was AVP of Infrastructure, and everybody thought that I was IT. And so all the social invites I would get to where I was, meet and greets I would get there and I realized that I was the only person that wasn't IT, and they all thought that I was. And so every time they would use a term that I wasn't super familiar with, I would go look it up, research it, And one of those terms one day was RPA. And so I researched what it did. And I said, well, wait, this can solve a lot of my other problems. And so I talked to my director of analytics and said, hey, looking at this RPA. And he said, well, what's RPA? And I later found out that after I had talked to him, he went and looked it up. And and so that's really, it's a curious start on how we found, that type of technology. But then we realized that it wasn't that difficult to deploy, and it allowed us to connect systems that we otherwise may not be able to. So not everything is, a uh, unique thought or some advanced thinking. This was just literally us listening and us seeing something that had potential for us and capitalizing on it.
It's kind of it's really an interesting and strong argument for getting in the room with people you might not otherwise be in, right? Like it was almost by chance that you ended up in the room with these IT folks, and look what happened. You learned something new. And I think that's, we're big supporters of APA and other associations where like-minded people from similar industries get together to share best practices. But it's kind of a neat proof point for the value of sometimes getting outside of your own, the rooms that you're usually in as well.
Oh, absolutely. So it's really been that's been a fascinating process because I've learned so much from not only, for example, in the whole area of district energy, spending some time in Colombia and seeing how they practice district energy there is different than how we do it here. And in many cases, they found ways to do different scale of projects, smaller scale, because they just don't have the capital that we have in the U.S. And so as I learn, one of my, I think a strength that I have is that I am an avid learner, and I will go and I will look at what people are doing, and I have no extreme pride on doing it exactly the way I've done it. I will capture and bring ideas into the mix that I see, and that's really been a key to my growth in manufacturing as well. Is that I'm open to ideas as they come along. I do the appropriate vetting and make sure they make sense. But the industry's changing, and I have to be able to change with it. So.
Absolutely. No, that commitment to lifelong learning and curiosity and rethinking, I think, is needed now more than ever because things are changing so quickly. And kind of in that vein, we've talked a little bit about kind of where you are today, some of the challenges and some of the things that you're facing and how you're tackling them. Let's maybe shift to the future and thinking 5-10 years from now. What do you see how do you see facility and asset management evolving? What's going to be different? What's going to be the same? You're already tapping into some pretty cutting edge things with the RPA that you're talking about. So where do you see things going from here, Jim?
Well, I think, it sounds a little bit trite to say it with everything in the market, but I do think AI is going to change a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in just the whole realm of the costs that you have associated with gathering and loading information into systems, I think there's going to be better tools that take out some of that manual work and actually bring down the implementation costs for systems. Usually when you look at software deployments, you've got the actual cost of either cloud service or your cost of software on site, but your biggest cost is well, actually, I'll say it's your second biggest cost. Your second biggest cost is loading up the system with the data and getting the implementation right. The first biggest cost would be a system that you didn't implement right. So
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that kind of that incorrect or incomplete implementation, because a lot of people I talk to, they're like, "Oh, our CMMS system is terrible. We got to change." And in reality, when you dig a little deeper, oftentimes it's not that the CMMS system isn't good, it's that your implementation of the CMMS system isn't good, or the data in your CMMS system isn't good, and therefore you can't expect to take bad data and turn it into a high performance system.
well, so we could think about that in terms of education. So a person makes a decision to go to college. Maybe they want to do like me and become an engineer, and they decide, you know what, I will get a half of an engineering degree.
Yeah.
And And so some of those things, for you to really capitalize on the value, you've got to get to the end of it. And so I think that what happens, and a lot of times there's a lot of excitement going into putting systems in. Many times organizations underestimate the effort they're going to need to put into it, and many times I don't think they realize the fact that they don't really get the value back out if they don't do the work up front.
Yeah. It's I mean, in my opinion, it's one of, if not the most potentially disruptive things to a facilities group is to change their work order system, right? It's, whether the pre-existing one was working well or not, it touches on so many aspects of an operation for sure.
Well, yeah, I remember early in my career in manufacturing when we were first putting in our first CMMS systems there, and you would see that I would go into places and see so many partially implemented systems like that, and that they all had good intent. They needed to understand their costs. They need to understand how to manage their workforce, and they just never finished them, and they never got the benefit. And then of course it was, well, what a terrible system that is. Well, the system was just fine. It just wasn't implemented.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So, Jim, I wanted to kind of wrap up today with, I mean, as we were talking beforehand, right? You are one of the most prolific folks within the facility and infrastructure world that I've seen at social media posting, and I think you have a Substack now and on LinkedIn and other things like that. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the history of how you kind of moved in that direction, and kind of how you keep up and maintain the level of commitment to that work that you do?
Well, if you go back 4 years ago, I did not have a LinkedIn account at all, and now I have over 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. And you may say, well, how did I start? I've never been that interested in social media, uh, but what happened is I realized, it was actually while I was at FSU, I would hear the stories that were put out on things, and I realized that we weren't telling our story or our part of that story. Um, and so I've used it for two things. One, to get the story out there, and then the second piece to celebrate, what's going on with the team, people who had made accomplishments. And that's really how it started. Was was It was funny to me. It started kind of as a humor thing. Well, as I got working with it, people started reading it and started signing it, up on, basically liking posts or following me. And and as I kept doing the content, things got, I would start going to conferences and people were saying they were reading it, and I was like, well, I didn't think anyone was paying that much attention to it. And so, fast forward to the time I started at Georgia Tech, I realized that there was this significant piece that was being missed, that people wanted to hear the stories of facilities or the different types of things we're working on, but in a more natural tone, not pumped up like you would see on a brochure somewhere, but a little bit of the good, a little bit of the bad, a lot about connectivity and trying to bring people together, because I really do believe that if we're going to fix, whether it's fixing problems in the world or fixing problems in our organizations, we've got to be able to talk to each other and communicate with each other. But I realized that if we're going to be successful, we're going to have to learn to communicate with each other. And so today, as I have looked at it, is my thinking has evolved a little bit, in understanding that being able to tell our story at the right time uh, is really important. And we all think about having all this pressure to do a complete story.
Hmm.
But, my brother, for example, he's an associate publisher with for computer books.
Oh,
And
cool.
one of the things that they do is, that computer technology is changing so fast that one of the product offerings they have is you can actually buy the book and get the chapters as they're being written. It's like a premium
Interesting.
service. And
Interesting.
so recently I've been thinking about that myself, and I'm starting to put more, things out that are a part of our journey. Uh,
Hmm.
I, you know, and I've incorporated different elements in it. Recently, I wear a hat on campus to keep the sun off my head, and originally all I had were straw hats, and I didn't want to look like a farmer, walking around on the campus, and so I bought a fedora type hat. It worked great for keeping the sun off, but then it became this symbol within the department that everybody on campus knows who I am now because I'm the guy. I'm the guy with the hat. And so then I started using AI generated art and integrating it into my stories, and so it's been one of those things. So if you're asking what kind of drives the doing it, it's that it's fun. It's not really work that I'm having to do. I think it plays a great value in celebrating the successes of our team, but I think it also starts connecting people. Um, and then when I look at the amount of different followers I have on there now, I get a lot of questions through messaging from various people, and you realize that people have been missing that level of connectivity. And so recently, when I started the Substack, it's just mainly there so I can do a little more longer form articles when I need to. But everything I do is about bringing people together, and because I think that the problems we solve are a combination of technology and people, not just technology or just people. So,
No, that's awesome. That's great, and I love the focus on story. I mean, that's part of the reason why we started this podcast was because because I'm lucky enough to get around to conferences like HEF where we were earlier this year or APA. I get to hear people's stories, but little bits and pieces, snippets of people's stories. But they're really cool, whether that's a career journey or a challenge being faced. But I do think that I mean you're spot on that shared connection, that shared learning. None of us is smart as all of us. So those types of things. That's how we're going to deal with these challenges that honestly have been decades in the making that we only have years to solve, right?
right.
No, that's great, and thank you so much, Jim, for sharing your story. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with before we say goodbye and let you get back to campus?
Well, I would say the big thing is that you see a lot of doom and gloom painted out there for higher education. I think higher education will do fine. It's kind of finding its footing. If you're a smaller school, you're dealing with that demographic cliff. But I think that if we look at how to serve our students, and at Georgia Tech, definitely students is our first focus. I think that we still have a big job educating all the people that need to be educated. I think we need to think about how we can better equip them with the technology that we have so that they can really know all the pieces they need to know to do some of these complicated implementations or systems we engineer or even process on how we manage. But I don't think that the future is doom and gloom for higher ed. I think it's got a bright future, and really honestly, I think if all of us in the world work together, we all have a bright future. So
That's awesome. I No better way to wrap it up than that. Thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate your time, your insights, and your ongoing commitment to higher education. So thanks so much for joining us.
no, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Jim, thanks for sharing your perspective. Your experience really highlights how powerful asset management can be when systems are connected and teams have the information they need to make good decisions. At the end of the day, technology only works when people understand and trust the data behind it. Thanks again for joining us on Telling Your Asset Management Story.